InnerTV. I'm your host, Althea Provost, and if you're new to my channel, InnerTV offers conversational-style interviews with an emphasis on respectful sharing. Today's guest is Miguel Mendonça. In this interview, we will explore how ET contact is shifting the terrestrial field of consciousness within humanity. Miguel Mendonça is an Anglo-Azorean writer, musician, glass artist, and healer based in Bristol, England. Miguel co-authored Meet the Hybrids with Barbara Lamb, a study of the lives of 8 ET human hybrids living on Earth. He authored We Are the Disclosure, A People's History of the Extraterrestrial Field, and Being with the Beings, the How and Why of ET Contact. Welcome, Miguel, to InnerTV.
Thank you, Althea. Yeah, nice to be with you.
You have been on quite the ride, my friend, producing 3 books highlighting the disclosure movement from the bottom up. Thank you.
Well, it's been a pleasure, really. I mean, incredibly challenging, and I think that it probably is for most people who come into the field cold, even though I guess for me it started at age 3, but I didn't think about that very, very early experience as a contact experience. I mean, I spoke to so few people about it through my life that it wasn't until I started to work with, particularly the hybrids, on Meet the Hybrids, so that was only 2015, that I started to just get this creeping sense of familiarity. And a lot of that, I would say, was quite unexpected because a lot of the things that happened with me happened so early that they were formative, but because I wasn't around a community of experiences until, the middle of this decade, I just had no real context for it. So it was just strange stuff that had happened, but I did not connect it, I guess, to the world of ETs and things of that sort. I would just put it, and I still would only put it broadly in the somewhere on that spectrum of kind of metaphysical experience.
So for those who are not familiar with Miguel's work, he has interviewed and compiled the written responses of ET experiencers who share their individual encounters with ETs, their personal understandings of who they are as hybrids or contactees, and their mission if known. And then he takes it a step farther and interviews engineers, scientists, industry pundits who attempt to describe ET crafts or propulsion systems, even perhaps the suppression of contact experiences in their given field, and more. So he has literally jumped in since 2015 with, I would say, a lot of behind-the-scenes people, ETs perhaps, overlighting him to produce 3 seminal books on this very topic. So I wanted to ask you, why do you think ETs are involved in the field of consciousness?
Wow, what a huge question that is. You'd think after all this time I'd have something pithy, but to be honest, I try not to land on any very hard and fast conclusions, because if I would say the thing I've learned the most about in this whole process over the course of my entire life is really my own ignorance. So it always, I don't know, and in my degree, in my 3rd level and postgrad studies, the first thing you learn is to make a case. You cannot just pontificate and say, oh, it's like this. You have to build an argument. You have to develop an understanding of something. And so if you ask me this time next week, my answer will be different. It'll be different to what it was a year ago. When I worked on each book, I would say there's been a development, and I wouldn't say necessarily that it's a development towards some final ultimate understanding, because I think all we really have is where we are at any given time. What is my reality in this moment, right now? And so, with all that being said, if I have to answer the question of how are ETs involved in consciousness, I would say that there's many different levels to it, and it depends what you define by ET. Because I haven't had a long personal interaction with beings that look like what we would class as an ET, It's hard for me to say. All I can do is sort of go on, is what anybody can really do is sort of pull together a patchwork of the information that we've come across through directly and indirectly. I would say my contacts are primarily angelic. They are beings that appear to me as angelic beings. They look like textbook angels and seem to behave in that way. They show up, one, in a near-death experience, a lot over the last year since I started to practice Reiki. In fact, when I was finishing my Q1, they showed up while I was treating my teacher, and she saw them before I did. So that's the kind of being that's around me, and in terms of the way all of my encounters since the age of 3 have impacted my consciousness, I think all of it has repeatedly pulled me out of the materialist mindset. Every time I kind of get dragged into this sort of, in this conversation, we can throw around terms like vibration and density because your audience will understand what that means. For most people, you have to adjust your kind of conceptual language a little bit, but all of us can get dragged into the, I don't want to say the muck, but just the kind of the gritty 3D living stuff. Whereas when an angel shows up, you are automatically pulled out of it. You're automatically put in a very, very different place. At the very least, because a lot of this stuff will be interpretive, because it's not like I remember what has been said to me. Often it comes in downloads. Some of it has been conversational, but my memory kind of sort of lasts about 5 seconds in those experiences because they're so overwhelming. So I don't tend to recall a lot of what is said. It often acts to support the idea that I am clearly of interest to other intelligences, other forms of consciousness, none of which have been embodied. I've only met ETs in dreams. The angels, they've shown up, and the first one appeared to be impressing itself literally onto the three-dimensional fabric of the space. I mean, it was actually in a tent, and its wings were pushing up the sides of the tent. It was just sort of kneeling down opposite me. So, yeah, it's still, for myself, very much a work in progress. As I say, I try not to come to any sort of hard and fast conclusions. I just allow myself to remember what has happened to me and to think about it, to be stimulated by it philosophically, I would say, and I guess it just helps to feel less abandoned here. I mean, I just felt from a very early age that I was not of this world because humans are just so baffling to me. So the angelic presence tends to give me a sense that that someone is very much in my corner and very concerned for me, and that tends to be very supportive of a kind of long-term stay on this planet.
That's interesting. Thank you for sharing that. I was given that question. I had actually different questions I was going to ask you based on your work. And I asked them, so I want you to answer that question for me. And what I got back was this consciousness is operating from a reference point of we, and that we as humanity are going to a reference point of we, which is why that they are affecting the field of consciousness. And that was interesting to hear that point of view, because I have, like you, my own personal referencing points. And for me, when ET comes knocking, oftentimes I am seeing how I operate from my current state of consciousness. They're reflecting to me where I'm at. Like you said, you get pulled out into a vaster level of consciousness, I do the same. So it's like you're getting pulled along the ladder of an upwards momentum of consciousness, and at the same time linking back to that past, because it's a stair-step process. Just like you can look back at 2015 and say, holy heck, I started getting involved in this ET consciousness thing. I didn't have any ET show up at my door and say, you must do this work. But 3 years later, I probably didn't see it coming, but I would write 3 books and have all these interactions with people.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, the point about the collective consciousness in Being with the Beings, the final book of the trilogy. I interviewed Lisa Royal Holt. The information that came through, I mean, I interviewed her and I interviewed Sasha, the future Pleiadian self version of Lisa. And both of those conversations, the point was very much, was very strongly made that the Pleiadians, the interpretation that Lisa has, the experience she has with Sasha, it's all about moving towards a more collective consciousness and less, and sort of away from the sort of individuated consciousness that we have here. I mean, you can take a look at the world and you can see the effects of fragmented consciousness. You can see how in whole political spheres there are constructions that say you shouldn't care about other people, that why should your tax dollars support the medical care of someone you never met, as one example. And then you look at the sort of the extent of tribalism on this planet, where people do create tribes. Often this is, I would say, a source of conflict, fairly ready source of conflict that I think just goes back right down the chain, genetically back into our past. You can sort of understand it to a degree, but I'm just still so baffled that humans choose it, because I feel, even as I was driving today, this thought was going through my head that surely it's a choice. And if it is a choice, I mean, it comes up a lot in sort of, I guess, I don't want to say higher level, but the sort of more developed discussions about the role of ETs and so forth. And yeah, I think the whole thing just tends to move us at least into a place of being able to reflect on the human experience. One of the conversations that is commonly had is that one particular narrative says that the whole purpose of planet Earth and 3D realities like this is for polarity. It's to experience conflict. It's to experience difference. Not, I mean, it all has a purpose.
And the individuated state, so that a person can see how they're co-creating their reality, right? So if they want separation, they can create separation, and they can have essentially their cake and eat it too, but at a certain point at a cost, right? So that it pushes the other group of people that are here on this planet into that we group, which is, look, you know, these are our waters, these are our lands, you're affecting our future generation. Begin to self-check the other system. We're in this place of two systems being side by side on this planet, and one system will eventually dominate. Just has to happen in terms of survival of the planet with us on it. What I'm interested in, what I tend to lean towards, is I came in with a desire to reconnect and be a cosmic citizen. That's very important to me. You know, what that means to me, Miguel, is it's impeccability as much as I can be with my word, action, and deed. Because everything on the higher level is seen. There is no hiding. There is no sense of hiding. You can't. That's too bright for me. And so to walk into a state of consciousness, expanded state of consciousness, it's a different ball game in which one plays from. I can play in that ball game well embodied, just like you can as an angelic. Diverse landscapes, you still have the co-creative ability to lock your feet in, bring down esoteric thought or consciousness into the material and create it here for other people to grow from. It's tremendous. amount of work, but it can be done, as you know it.
I think one of the narratives that I've heard a lot lately is what you can almost call the splitting world narrative, which is that all the people who are trying to develop their consciousness and want to evolve, essentially. Of course, that's a loaded word. All of these are loaded terms, and everybody has their own definition. But broadly, I think we understand what's meant by those terms in this context. So one aspect of humanity is wanting to evolve, is wanting to come from love, whereas love, oneness, connection, all of that good stuff. Whereas a lot of the planet, I mean, you look at what's happening in Europe, all over the planet, the divisions in the United States, I mean, what's happening in Brazil, Venezuela, I mean, it's endemic. And it feels as if there's one chunk of humanity that is basically just plummeting at this point into darkness. That's the way it feels. Yeah. And yet people talk about this flowering of consciousness, the awakening that's going on all over the planet. So a lot of people that I talk to tend towards the view or playing with the idea that perhaps this is what is unfolding at this point, and at some point there will be a separation, a complete separation, where some people will stay here in the 3D grounded reality, and they will continue to work through all of their processes, their soul agreements, everything they came here to do. It may be that it can't get done on a planet that is so polarized, and maybe it needs all-out war because it needs to experience all-out war, and it can't experience that if there's all these other people pulling in the other direction and just praying continually for peace and trying to establish a love-based society rather than the fear-based society, which sadly, especially if one watches and reads the news, one could be forgiven for feeling has become the dominant force on this planet. So that's just one narrative. It's, again, I never like to get to any firm conclusion because I don't have the answers. But I talk to dozens of people on a regular basis in this field, all of whom have been involved in it, in consciousness, in their unfolding for a very long time. And this is one of the sort of most, I would say, live conversations or live kind of narratives at this point.
I think that the narratives can come from having a desire, a future-oriented desire of where one wants to go with their consciousness. For myself, I have some experiences, some soul memory, one of which was at Chichen Itza. And at Chichen Itza, we would raise the consciousness of the people that assembled there. They would come in with a very split mind. And through a series of vibrational stair-step process of moving through the vibrational layers of consciousness, they would become more and more and more agitated, almost to the point of anger, fist fight, this type of thing, because they were still heavily separated in their mind and body, spirit, from the truth. And there would be whistling, and the way the amplification of Chichen Itza works, you could hear, if a whistle from other side of the pyramid, you could hear it over on the other side. So here we are, we're whistling and contacting each other and holding that vibrational steady so there wasn't a snapping point. And at a certain point and level, there would be a bursting open of consciousness, and people would remember themselves as brothers and sisters again. These were schools back in the day. This is a very old memory of mine. We're talking a small locale of people, not global. So sure. I don't know how it's going to happen. I can only self-reference and operate from my soul's reflection, but in the here and now. So yes, I do see a complicated society, very similar, stripped, aggravated, leaning towards disclosure or destruction. Here we are. Again, And I also understand the cyclical cycles of the evolvement of the Earth. I try not to get too heavy laden with what's happening on the planet. I feel it. Before we went to record on this call, we were speaking about how we wake up tired. There is an exhaustion from the conscious folks because we are simultaneously experiencing not only the density here on this planet, but we're experiencing it from a soul's perspective when we're not in our body, the bigger picture. And so there's a lot of work happening behind the scenes, I would say.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And with that means that we still have a choice point. Where do you think we're going consciously? I know you know the narratives, but what do you think?
Wow. Are you talking about the planetary scale?
Yeah.
I honestly, off the top of my head, I could not say. I am just as curious an observer as everybody else. My work in the environment, I would say, certainly disposed me towards the view that there will be a collapse on this planet. And I think there'll be a collapse as much as anything because people can't imagine that there will be a collapse, that they feel that we've reached a point in our technology that we can just fix it. We can make anything happen that we choose to. Right. Because on the technological level, it's simply inconceivable to people that the decision makers would allow it. That I guess people over a certain age would recall the ozone layer issue in the 80s and 90s, and there was certainly work done globally to substitute ozone depleting chemicals for non-ozone depleting chemicals, and there's just such an endless supply of spin out there which tells people go back to sleep, you don't have to worry, we've got this, it's all fine. And then you have people like Trump emerging and saying it is a hoax perpetrated by the Chinese to damage American industry. I mean, the quote-unquote leader of the free world is not just telling a bunch of friends around a dinner table, someone told me it was Chinese. He's getting out there with the biggest possible platform and telling people around the world, forget it, it's not even real. There's no such thing as climate. This was my work. I did 10 years studying, working in environment, sustainability, energy. So to hear people when Obama arrived, you thought, okay, maybe some forward motion, because America had been incredibly intransigent, as well as the Chinese, India. There were certain, highly industrialized nations and rapidly developing nations that needed to fuel their development with coal because it was cheap and available. So it was very easy for these guys to get out and block things through the UN process. And I was at some of those events, and I could see the Americans in action, doing everything they could to make nothing happen. I mean, that was Bush era. I don't know about after that. So when you involve yourself in this work and you look at how hard people, vested interests, are pushing back against the kind of work we have got to do if we are going to survive past the end of this century with a civilization that looks remotely like the one we now exist in, then, it's tough to be particularly, sanguine or optimistic. I feel that it is inevitable that there will be a collapse of civilization as we know it. There's no way that can't happen. And that may be unavoidable already because of the amount of long-term climate forcing that's already baked into what is in the atmosphere in terms of CO2 and other, particularly CO2, but some other climate-forcing gases.
people who are listening that Miguel has worked in the sustainability field for over 10 years, specializing in renewable energy policy. While serving as a research manager for the international NGO, he has lectured widely and wrote textbooks, articles, and papers, and as you can see here, based on evidence. I hear where you're coming from, and I'm thankful for you saying that. I'd also like to say that if you are familiar with cycles within cycles of planetary history, we will always know that there will be someone of the leader of the free world or someone who has a platform who will come and play the shadow card, which is ridicule, denial, and suppression of truth. That has happened numerous times of failed Earth experiences, Atlantis being one of them. You're from the Azores. So here we are. We have it in our soul's history and record of times in which we've come onto the planet where we've reached a place of consciousness, some levels of consciousness where we understand that we are interconnected, that our worlds are interconnected, one within the other, and at the same time have the right to have that, and it has gone horribly wrong. You're right. And this one could possibly go horribly wrong as well. It sure looks that way. But they don't necessarily send in people. As an angelic, you answered, and I heard you. You're observer, and you answered like an observer. And your humanity portion of you came in through the work that you've done as someone in the sustainable field. And I hear that as well. But I'd also like to offer our audience that other choice point, which is we came in, whether we're observers, here to affect, or other, to participate in this we movement. And it really is a we movement. And I think the point being is that we all play our cards to the best of our ability. And do I think something's coming down the pike? Well, they keep telling me that. Yeah, I do. I do. But it could be beautiful, too.
Well, we have to leave the door open for miracles, do we not?
Well, an angel showed up in your tent. An ET showed up on the side of the road for me, one in my bedroom. You know, I've had crap over my, something's happening. Are they here to save me? Nope, they're not. You know that. They're not Scion. They're not God. They're not doing anything. They're reflectors, and they're saying, wake up, get busy. And so that's why I asked you before we recorded. I said, how busy are you? I know you're busy. You're flat out busy. And the reason why is because we're all busy. We're all pushing to say to everybody else, let's wake up, smell the coffee. There is a greater level of choice point here, and I hope we're taking it. I really do. I hope we're taking it. It's as much as we can do as an individual.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to me, this idea of awakening and choice and all of these things. I mean, in a way, I've for sure absorbed so much information that it's impossible to sort through it all to find some ultimate interpretation. So often in these discussions, there will be different pieces of information will rise up, and some of it will just show up, and I've never heard it before, or it aligns. It just crystallizes. One particular thing is coming up, which is something that was said to me by, I'm trying to think, so I'm getting 3 different women pop up that could have said this. Dr. Rita Louise, Dr. Christiane Quiros. Yeah, it could have been. Yeah, there's a few potential candidates, but one of these people, when I was talking about, or maybe it's Lisa, it was about purpose and choice and all of these things. And the idea of, is it possible to fail in our life's purpose? And the phrase that she used was, I don't think your soul gets to miss the bus. Something like that. I don't think your soul can miss the bus. It's almost impossible for you to not at least be given the opportunities to live the life that you chose. I mean, if we think about guidance and guides and all of this stuff, synchronicity, serendipity, all of that stuff, it feels like there are over and over and over again little or not so little moments in life where we are nudged gently or forcefully back onto our path. I mean,
absolutely.
You know
like
what?
you've had the angelics, right? I've had, well, at this point, I had 2 Palladians show up, and literally like get on the bus. And it's just like, and normally they don't do directives, but we all come in with different things that we're here to do, right? And so it's like, no, I absolutely agree with Lisa or whoever that said that in one of your books, because I don't think the soul necessarily gets it wrong. They're playing different aspects, and we get these evolutionary moments. We're here at one of them, right? But I also want to say I came in heavily with precognition. I knew that I was from the stars. I knew that this ETs were my family. And I woke up into a system like you do, where you look around and you're like, holy heck, what is this place, right? But at the same time, because of that precognition, I saw and understood from an observer point of view that some things are planned out and some things aren't. It will, for me, and I hate to hammer it, but it's just true from where I'm coming from, that it is a choice point. And so we can show up and do the best that we can, and do it from a state of as much clarity as we can these days. It's difficult to get clarity, with the dross that's happening here on the planet. At the same time, I'd like to say that if we can't get it wrong, and let's say it's going to play out right, wrong, good, bad, whatever, your response is going to be everything. That's it. Your response is going to be everything. How you respond to whatever situation you're in that experience will be your everything. It will be a reflection of your consciousness.
Yeah, I mean, see, all of this whole thing, I try and tell people, look, this is not really about quote-unquote spaceships and aliens.
I agree.
All of this comes down through experience and the way you process it and your development with it or your rejection of it. But everything in your life, this and everything else, it always comes down to the same single thing, which is, how am I going to behave now?
That's right.
What do I want to do that I can do? What choices am I going to make? Because in the moment, you don't even have to necessarily scan your values and your history and all the rest of it. Every single thing that ever happened in this universe led to you in a moment with a choice.
There you go.
And that's it. And if we can carry that idea, I think life becomes a far more vivid and interactive experience, because we feel like we're no longer on rails at that point. Free will could be a complete illusion. It may be that all of us are utterly deluded and misinformed, and reality is something completely different, or it's something larger.
Yep,
However, so in other words, it could all be an illusion in terms of free will, and yet we could take the opposite view, or we could at least park that view and say, okay, maybe free will is an illusion, and yet I have the experience of free will, and I'm going to exercise it thus. And to me, that is an exciting way to live. I think it offers us every day a truly unique and kind of momentous experience. I mean, it could be something really small that could really be very triggering in terms of, I mean, I'll tell you one story that it sounds bizarre, but this is what happened. 2007, I had just published my first book. It was on renewable energy policy, and that's not what I imagined I was going to be writing about when I was in my late teens, early 20s, and I was just obsessed with William Burroughs and Jack Kerouac and Henry Miller and Charles Bukowski. You know what I'm saying? It's not it's not what I expected to be writing about. Nonetheless, it was very effective. In fact, the house I live in now is covered in solar panels, partly because of the work that we started, and that book was a big piece of that puzzle. However, so I am in a highly elevated state, having achieved my only life's ambition, other than being able to fly like Superman. So I'm walking down into the city, and I'm reaching a bus stop, and I happen to notice on the pavement there is a piece of chewing gum. And in that moment, my consciousness connects in such a profound way with that chewing gum, the fact that I am a conscious entity that can connect with another entity, a piece of chewing gum that was probably trodden onto that pathway 20 years earlier. But the fact that here I am, there it is, and we are connecting in this moment, and fate brought us together. And basically what happened is I felt the top of my head open, almost like a missile silo, and I looked up and I see this swirling white vortex of energy that is taking up the entire sky like a colossal tornado, and the whole thing starts to spin and spiral down, and this thing, the tip of this thing goes into my open cranium, and it just basically pours through me, filling me with light. And I spent the next 2 weeks in a state of absolute bliss, to the point where I could barely function. I would just notice a scuff on the wall. I would notice, something on a shelf in a shop. I would just hear the tone of someone's voice and really focus on it, and it would just trigger a wave of bliss. The fact that I'm conscious and I'm able to experience this and connect with it and exchange energy with it. And it was so intense that in the end I had to shut it off because I simply couldn't function.
Yes,
I couldn't do a thing.
Yeah, because you couldn't focus. I mean, forget taxes. It's like you're just
right.
You're in the Williams Burroughs moment, but without the drugs and alcohol.
Right. Truly, yeah.
You really are.
Yeah, it was bananas.
I mean, using to get to these heightened states, and here you are.
Yeah, all I had to do is publish a book on feed-in tariffs. Incredible. But, I can still do it, but there's this almost reluctance because it just feels like indulgence in the end. It feels like, did I really come here just to be kind of blissed out to the point where I can hardly get life done? So, there's something about me that is... See, I wrote this book when I was in my 20s without ever thinking this is me, but only 20 years later did I realize what that book was about or who it was about. In this book, there are these couple of ETs that come down during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and they're just here to observe. One is a physical scientist, the other is a social scientist. And the social scientist ends up getting so sucked in to what happens on the ground in terms of the peace movement and the Cold War that he goes native. He becomes a hippie and drops out and lives off the grid, and that whole thing. Basically he came to observe and he goes native, and he just does everything he can at a certain period to make changes. And only like 20 years later did I get that I was writing that about me. That's what happened. Yeah, crazy.
Oh, I love it. Well, surrender to the connection. But like
what else can you do?
I do. There's moments like you where I'll hit static states, bliss states, and then it's like, I don't want to use the word pay, but people do understand. I do pay for it because then I will forget appointments. I won't be able to function in terms of remembering to eat, especially if I get very big downloads of light. I hate to use that word downloads. It sounds ridiculous. But if light enters my central column, then I get filled by the light, so I don't necessarily feel hunger. There's things that come with that state of consciousness. And But I can look out at the field, come back in as my observer, look out at the field, experience my clients, experience you, experience other people's conversations deliciously, like I did with your book. And as I told you before that we recorded, I couldn't finish your book. I read front to end, and I take notes. I'm very, I love it. And I couldn't, because I kept getting triggered with your books, especially with the scientists and the pundits. My mind thinks that way, so I was triggered to remember this and this and this, and and then I go many different tangents. But anywho, here I can say, you know what I'm talking about, Miguel. I know that's why I asked you to do this. I could see your field. I'm like, brother. So here we are. We're observing. We're experiencing, we're going, what the fuck, people? But at the same time, we can't go judgment because we know that will pull us down. And at the same time, they're here to learn. And just like we are, and we don't know, which for me is exciting. Even though I've had very profound moments and seen many things, we still don't know.
Yeah.
We don't. And that's the best part.
To be honest, I don't ever want to reach the finish line. I mean, do you ever watch a movie?
Finish line. Even with the closure of
what I'm saying?
There is no finish line. It's consciousness expanding on itself, going and going and going, until I guess you could say maybe the great creator says, "I'm done with this shit. Let's end this. Let's end it." And at that point, it's over. But we don't know that.
Yeah, I mean, it's by the finish line. I mean a sense of. I mean, I've had that, I would say. There's plateaus, right? I mean, everybody listening to this knows what we're talking about. When you dive into this stuff, you fill up, you just gorge on books and lectures, and you go to conferences, and you watch documentaries and listen to interviews, and you just gorge on it. And
I'll interrupt you on this. That was not me. I went through experience-based learning, and I've read, I think I'm on my 6th book. You might be my 6th book. And I didn't do lectures and things like that because I guided not to, so that I could develop my own stream of consciousness, independent. Go ahead.
Yeah, the point is that however I think the information comes in, whatever the experience, I think, generally speaking, it is a fairly common experience that we plateau. We reach a point of almost saturation that we start to hear the same things going round and around, and it's almost like, well, am I done? I'm not hearing anything new at this point. Like, where do I go to develop this? Is this it? Did I just hit kind of the peak or bedrock or something with this subject? And then that's the illusion. That is the illusion that every once in a while you feel like what else is there to hear? But the amazing thing is that a lot of it can come from other people's dreams. Even if we've all told each other all our stories, somebody will email me or I'll have a dream and we'll get talking, and dreams will bring through whole new levels. I mean, I'm writing a novel at the moment which basically strings together a sequence of dreams I've been having since probably my teenage years. So we could be talking 30 years of dreams which they're just not like ordinary dreams. Most people know the flavor of a regular dream, but these have such a different flavor to them. Like, I show up and I know who I am. I know where I am. I have a real sense of backstory, but it's not me. It's not I'm seeing places I've lived or people that I've known. It's totally different. They're on other planets. There's crazy powers and abilities that I have, that other people have. There's all kinds of ET craft. There's just, it goes on and on and on. But none of these craft are like anything I've ever seen in a movie or a photograph. But yet, here they are, but just one after another, completely unique craft. And so that takes me into a very different place. And one of them in the summer, I was a walk-in and able to conjure and travel through portals to other planets. And so, yeah, there are alternative routes to information that's not the standard, sort of YouTube, lectures, books, and so forth. And I guess that it comes when, at the right time. I guess you get to a point, you get to a level of understanding, a level of awareness, and you think, okay, this bit makes sense to me at this point. I feel like I know where I'm at. And I think then you almost send a signal out and say, I'm ready, hit me.
Do the exact same thing. I'm like, I'm ready for more. Send me this. It's like when I was reading your book about Klaus Donna, and he's a self-referenced spiritual archaeologist, and he was linking liquid mercury, to Teotihuacan in Mexico, and then also to the I don't know how you say it, Vimanas, the ships that of old India. 2 days ago, I was thinking about liquid mercury and its effects on the light body, and it just keeps coming, because where are we going? So, again, it's just these little pieces that people put out. They don't even know they're putting out or conscious that that's where it's, headed, but you start to connect all these dots, and it's good. And anybody who knows more, please email me. We have this informational resource system, a highly reflective system here on Earth, and what you think you can put out and receive, and it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and it just keeps things bubbling, There's
because of the angelic nature that you're probably pulling in more here on the Earth than other aspects of yourself, although you're experiencing them, as you say, in your dream time. One of the things that you want to be careful of is just not to get pulled down into the density here, and on some level be aware of it, but not digesting of it, if that makes sense to you. There is a part of me that I'm in the industry. I work as a clairvoyant, and my bioenergetic skin suit can feel other people's feelings and emotions when I'm given the permission, but I'm very careful to disconnect and to not take on other people's learning journeys, allow it to be what it is, share what I can, and let go, so that we can remain that observer.
So do you have any, funnily enough, I ended up watching a string of YouTube videos last night as I was dropping off to sleep about letting go, because that is, I guess, one of my biggest challenges as somebody with a very open heart and open mind.
Yeah, well, I had my dark night of the soul at 8 about being a puppet on a string in this universe, so I understood everything that you were saying throughout this call. So yes, do I have an ability or do I have suggestions about letting go? I think it's about understanding the consciousness itself. So if we come back and look at everybody here is on a learning curve. And when we have an open heart, we want to share, but we don't want to pour in information down that central column of another light information, light intel, if they can't sustain it. Even if they're hungry for it, it's about sustainability of what you know. We're careful in that regard, but we also have to be careful about our own. So like you said, not blissing out all the time is probably a better option for you so that you can stay functional in this 3D paradigm. Again, it's about us making conscious choices of what we can handle and what we can't. I cannot be around extreme negativity. That is too difficult for my system. Painful, actually. So I am careful about that. And if I'm around people who have experiences, or my preference would be intellectuals, the reason why is they have, on some level, cleared out the egoic nature so that we can swap information without someone feeling less than. Now, in terms of digesting, we'll come back to that liquid mercury. As we go light body, the light body has its own internal mechanism. And what it does is it has a fire. And within that fire, it can take that emotional body that's sucking in all that external information on the earth, reading it so that we understand it, feel safe, and reads the outgoing field, but in our walkabout was internalizing it and taking it into our cells, our muscular, our organs, and we were getting stuck. So when the light body kicks in, that information comes in and it incinerates quickly. So it's like I can read the information, I can get the wisdom, but I'm not digesting it. careful. So if I start to get too tired, or I haven't eaten, or I haven't taken care of myself, I avoid greater work because I know that I've depleted my own ability to move through energy quickly, and I have to set my schedule differently.
Was there some sort of crisis point that kind of forced that, or was it something innate?
Well, what happened is the ETs came to me and they said, look, we're going to put you out there. You're not going to like it. I've never, like you, I mean, when you said I didn't want to do any of this, I had no desire to be seen, to be known, to talk about ETs, even though I know I am an ET and I know that I'm from an ET family and this is just one star system I'm doing a walkabout on. That was really hard for me. They pushed me out, and what happened is I gave myself 3 years to see what I was made of, what Althea, her human body, can handle. And I learned very quickly by the end of the 3rd year that I could not do volume. I could not do, even with a heart of gold, handle a bunch of people in a given day. I'd had to parse myself out because I started to get depleted. So you could say it was self-chosen pain because I was trying to see where I fall flat and where I can stand.
Yeah.
And what I learned was that when my angelic side started kicking in, that as much as I love people, and I actually do love humanity, wow, right? But I do. I love humanity. I respect humanity. I respect the story. I do. I really do. That's why I do what I do. But at the same time, that doesn't mean I'm going to become bedfellows with it or have Trump-like person over for dinner, because the density drop is too intense for me. It literally affects my biocircuitry. So I understand and have respect for their walkabout, but I also have a profound respect for my own.
Yeah, that's good. And do you mind me asking what age you are?
Me? Oh, I'll never disclose. I'm limitless.
I'm just wondering, my curiosity is in how long it took you to get to that point.
Well, it took me 3 years because I chose when they threw me out there. I didn't ask to be on interviews. It all came to me. I didn't do any of it. It was like, they pulled the strings and I showed up and said yes, terrified.
Right.
And just not even having a handle on myself whatsoever. I mean, it was like splat. But when I said, okay, if this is necessary and needed for me to experience, here my ego will kick in, my this will kick in, and I'll just have to sort it out afterwards. So I just gave myself 3 years, literally 3 years. Okay, I'll say yes, 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 yes until I say no. And I've gotten to know, and my no is a very big dividing line. If someone comes to me and let's say they're early seekers, I don't normally get them, but they're early seekers, and there's a lot of skepticism and a lot of this and a lot of that. It's a pretty quick transition. I just don't spend much time there anymore. It's not needed for me to prove to somebody that there's extraterrestrial consciousness or angelic consciousness or I'm not there. I'm not that teacher.
Yeah. If
you shift into we and have a respectful conversation, we move forward very quickly.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I find in interviews it's tough if people, because most people know me for Meet the Hybrids, and that's mostly what people want to talk about, and they want to kind of kick off with what's the proof? Have they done DNA tests? Proof. And I say, well, for one thing, I don't think there is a DNA lab on this planet, no commercial one, that has pre-alien DNA. I mean, how is it going to recognize anything? How would that even work? I don't know. But for another, the point is to not get caught up on the material aspects of this, because DNA is a material aspect. For me, where the action is the metaphysical and the spiritual aspects of this thing. To me, these people are spiritual teachers, and they have profoundly affected my life. in the most wonderful way. I mean, in a way that I'm still sorting through because it still affects me, because I'm friends with most of them still. You know, a couple of them, sadly, Cynthia Crawford is no longer with us at all, but most of them, you know, I keep up with, and some I talk to a lot. And so there is a continual kind of process by which I am able to expand, and we can say anything to each other. That's because we know where we're at. We're not getting bogged down in the kind of proof discussions, because there's no such thing. I mean, what I did philosophy of science after my degree, I just did a postgrad course, and in that I realized that people argue over facts, quote unquote, constantly. So, in fact, the position someone holds tells you more about them than it does about the subject itself. Yeah, generally, when we open our mouths, what we're doing is we're telling a story of us rather than telling a story about the world. It's what we're saying is, this is how I'm experiencing myself, the world and everything in it, the universe. This is who I am. This is where I'm at. But, you know, and I think, frankly, we could have a sort of a more kind of useful, colourful, exciting discussion if we can get to that level when we talk with each other, that we don't hide who we are, that we're willing to say, this is me, this is the good and the bad, this is where I'm at, this is what I know, this is what I don't know, and this is my experience here. Yeah, because
like
to me
that. See, I think skepticism can be used as a facade. In most cases, I think it's pure ego. In fact, let's scrap skepticism. Let's call it cynicism. Cynicism has a different flavor to it. That's dismissing something out of hand without looking at it. And in doing so, you're operating from an ego standpoint. Ego isn't just about arrogance. It's also about fear, which lives in the ego side of the brain, the left side. And you go on. And I agree with you. See, it stops the conversation. It stops that whole holistic experience. And until we get past fear, until we get past seeing separation, or those that are still in separation, they won't know what we're talking about. And that's fine. That's fine. But for me, and like you, there's a wealth of conversation to be had and a wealth of experiences to be mutually shared. And I'm interested in that. And that's where I put my time and energy.
Yeah. And like I said, to me, I think we can make more progress and we can have a more interesting time. Because what is the point of just trading headlines that we read and making that the basis of an argument when that's not the thing we're really arguing about? You know what I mean? It's just this kind of straw man stuff. It's like a lot of the time we're not willing to talk about our emotional experience, where we're at, who we are, our fears and vulnerabilities. And that, I think, is what we end up loading into the political sphere, because it's like this cause and effect of kind of human anxiety, and it's partly why I refuse to listen to or watch the news, and I've avoided it with every cell in my body since about 2010-ish,
oh, wow.
2011 maybe, yeah.
Well, I was going to invite you into the hot seat to talk about your understanding of the work that hybrids have had on you, and you've touched upon that. You know, frankly, I can see that it impacted you, and I felt deeply as I was reading Meet the Hybrids when it first came out that you had a deep respect for their level of sharing and provided them a platform unlike others at the time. So I thank you for that, because these people, the hybrids especially, I feel, are providing us an insight, a glimpse of our future selves, frankly.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it. I think part of what they do is, for one thing, they display incredible bravery and integrity. These are two things that I think everybody respects. Even if they don't agree, they can at least have respect for the fact that somebody's been brave enough to go out there and say, this is my truth about myself, recognizing they do it in a cultural context that says, you're nuts, you are either crazy, or you're lying, or you're so deluded, I don't even know how you have a driver's license. How have you got this far in life? You know, and they know full well that a huge percentage of the people that of society in general, not the kind of listeners to this show and others like it. I mean, people still have a skepticism. I know that these people, when they're at conferences giving talks on being a hybrid, people will come up to them and be very in their face. Prove it. How do I know you're telling the truth? And there is that whole, I think you were touching on earlier, I think that people really suffer when somebody will offer something that is very confronting to their worldview, to the paradigm they believe that they operate in. If somebody says to them, well, that's okay, but that's not the full truth, that's not the be-all and end-all, you are not just Joe Bloggs from Leicester. You are actually an infinite, immortal being who is just playing the role of Joe Bloggs from Leicester. You are coming here to have an experience in a 3D body, but you are actually divine love. You are spirit animating matter. You are immortal. You are infinite. This is just one aspect of your multidimensional self. You are just having a Joe Bloggs experience. That's it. I mean, you know, for Joe Bloggs, that could be absolutely shattering. And then again, it could be unbelievably liberating. So I guess that what happens is when, this is why it's called We Are the Disclosure, because it's just people, it's this bottom-up disclosure. This, I think, is legit, genuine, authentic disclosure. It's simply somebody offering their truth to the world. And it may just be that one single listener or reader out there in the world needed that information at that moment for their process. And that's good enough. But it just happens that this has touched the lives of, I mean, if you add up all the people who have listened to all the shows that have gone out about this since 2015, the documentaries that have been watched, the books that have been read, the articles, all the rest of it. I mean, this is, you know, the YouTube videos. I mean, it's probably well north of 1 million people. I mean, who knows? But I would say comfortably over 1 million people have come to hear about ET human hybrids living on Earth as humans since late 2015 when the book came out. And we have heard as a group, the people involved in the book project, myself, Barbara, the 8 hybrids, we've heard since then, those 3 years, about from people who say, I want to thank you guys because I've lived as a hybrid my whole life. I couldn't tell anybody. My parents are hyper-religious. They would never be able to cope with this. I couldn't tell friends or co-workers or my husband or wife or my kids. And then one day I hear an interview, I see a video, and people are finally out there talking about this. And that means everything to me. And that's a big deal.
Absolutely. Well, Miguel, I want to thank you for being on my show. And if you'd like to know more about Miguel Mendonça and his work, please visit wearethedisclosure.com. Thank you, Miguel.
It's my absolute pleasure, Althea.
Links are provided below. And remember to like, share, and subscribe for more InnerTV interviews.